Dromos, Part 1 on DEXs, August 17th, 2024. AMM DEXs, the foundations of DeFi. How DEXs work. Decentralized exchanges, DEXs, are a wholly new implementation of liquid markets and a fundamental primitive of entire decentralized finance, DeFi, ecosystems. Unlike traditional decentralized exchanges, which use a single entity to facilitate transactions and hold user funds, DEXs leverage automated market makers, AMMs. AMMs allow trustless and permissionless token swapping. DEXs can play a pivotal role in growing the on-chain ecosystem around them by offering several key advantages when compared to traditional exchanges. They allow users to create and transact on markets permissionlessly. They provide essential, always-on liquidity for other DeFi protocols to leverage programmatically, and they provide a real-time source of truth on token prices. What DEXs do? Permissionless market creation. Users can permissionlessly create markets for a wide variety of tokens on a DEX. Users can deposit tokens into these markets, facilitating token swaps without gatekeepers. On a basic AMM, a token swap looks like this. To swap USDC for WETH, or wrapped ETH, a trader sends USDC to a smart contract wallet pool containing both USDC and WETH, getting back WETH. There's now a little more USDC and a little less WETH in the pool. And because the pool is designed to always have equal values of both assets, WETH is now a little more expensive relative to USDC. More assets in the pools means traders can swap larger amounts without incurring major price changes, slippage. The ratio of USDC to WETH changes less for the same size trade in a larger pool. DeFi centrality. DEXs are central to DeFi because they enable frictionless programmatic swaps. This type of swap is often needed by other DeFi functions. For example, when lending protocols need to programmatically sell under-collateralized borrowed positions, DEXs provide an always-on buyer, allowing them to sell painlessly and on demand. Price discovery. Users need token price history to do almost anything in DeFi. When DEXs are adequately liquid and active with swaps and arbitrage activity, they provide accurate pricing, information on tokens, allowing oracles, automated trading, and other functions that rely on these data to operate correctly. What DEXs need? Every DEX has the same goal as a marketplace: offer the best trade execution with the most liquidity so traders use that DEX and not other modes of swapping. It's not quite a zero-sum winner-take-all game, though competition is real and has to be acknowledged. For this marketplace to work, traders need LPs to put up enough assets to allow low slippage trades, buying or selling more without moving the price too much. And LPs, liquidity providers, need compensation for the high risk of providing liquidity in the automated market maker, AMM. To understand why, articles on impermanent loss are instructive. Providing liquidity, or LPing, is risky, and LPs need compensation for their risk. DEX's primary challenge is to solve this bootstrap problem. This is a difficult problem. As an LP, it's not easy to make it worth your while as an LP, and so DEXs need to attract large capital providers to put up the capital to enable trades. DEX monetization, tokens, and economics. Although DEXs don't need any way to monetize or fund their operation, operations, building and operating a DEX are often done with some payoff in mind, especially given the risk of doing so in a hyper-competitive environment with enormous potential for value generation. Because traders benefit from the service, trading fees are often charged, usually at some percentage of trading volume. Often these DEXs will launch their own tokens. DEX tokens have several potential uses that can benefit builders and participants. The utility of these tokens can make a significant difference in a DEX's economic structure. A helpful framework for understanding a DEX is to view it as an economy. Generally speaking, a DEX economy relates to how its varied counterparties, traders, LPs, token holders, and contributors interact. Ideally, these counterparties organically help the DEX, decentralized exchange, operate sustainably and competitively towards the goal of deep liquidity and high trading volume. How a DEX's generated value is distributed between these counterparties, for example, tends to determine how the DEX is organized and how resistant it is to competition. As a token marketplace, a DEX is one of the only on-chain products so far with an undeniable product-market fit. People will pay to trade, and organizations will pay to attract liquidity to certain pools or to ecosystems. This means that there's a lot of generated value to distribute between stakeholders. Our view is that in a decentralized system, such as this one, distributing this value correctly is essential to sustaining a DEX's market position. How major DEXs solve the bootstrapping problem. Uniswap, the first superstar DEX. Innovations, new AMMs, and a foolproof compensation structure. The undisputed leader in AMM development, Uniswap, developed and popularized two key AMM structures, with still overwhelmingly used today. The VAMM. This is typically known as Uniswap v2, which allows for price discovery at infinite price ranges. LPs provide liquidity at all potential prices, which are calculated using the amount of tokens available on each side of a pool. Separately, concentrated liquidity, also known as V3. This AMM allows users to define price ranges for which they are willing to provide liquidity. This more flexible structure allows LPs to provide very deep liquidity around a specific price, set buy, sell orders at specific prices, or scale in and out of their positions. It is typically regarded as a much more capital-efficient structure than a VAMM because more of LP's capital can be allocated to price ranges where it will actually be used. There is also more risk and overhead associated with this structure. If the price moves outside of LP's defined ranges, their liquidity ceases to be used, and the risk of losses increase, so LPs frequently have to update their positions. This challenge has often left V3 LPing to be dominated by professional market makers and various third parties that will, for a fee, manage individuals' LP positions for them. Uniswap's approach to bootstrapping and its challenges. To incentivize LPs, Uniswap charges trading fees and directs 100% of them to LPs. In effect, LPs have to produce their own returns. They earn their share of whatever is generated by the protocol as they participate. To many, this is an economically sound model, one that doesn't require any outside incentivization or incentive token. Indeed, initially Uniswap didn't have any native tokens. There are a few limitations to this model, however, detailed below. Value generated by LPs is capped by volume and isn't robust to liquidity mining. Compensating LPs with 100% of protocol fees means that under this model, LPs' available earnings are capped. The most LPs can earn at any given point are fees from volumes occurring in that moment. So if LPs' returns are capped, how do you compete with Uniswap? Give LPs the opportunity to earn more than just their share of fees. SushiSwap was created to do just this, exploiting a concept called liquidity mining. With liquidity mining, LPs get not just volume fees, but also a bonus token, a little extra. So when SushiSwap said, "Come to us and we'll give you this bonus," LPs swarmed there to the tune of almost $1 billion in capital. Within a week of this program, Sushi had taken over half of Uniswap's capital. Uniswap's fee structure means that LPs are highly sensitive to Uniswap's ability to win trades and generate volume. Attracting capital away from Uniswap puts it at great risk, as LPs leave Uniswap's pools, generate less volume than previously, which lowers the potential for generated fees, which means remaining LPs earn less, which causes them to leave, kicking off a downward spiral. This doesn't mean that liquidity mining is itself a durable play. A protocol using liquidity mining on top of the LP fee compensation model is itself susceptible to other protocols running comparable incentive programs. This has resulted in a rotation of capital across various protocols and ecosystems, giving away value to temporarily attract capital, which inevitably leaves for the newest thing. Value is disproportionately given to LPs. It's no surprise that Uniswap's success as a marketplace has generated enormous value in fees to the tune of $1 billion annually since 2021. The collective efforts behind this success were provided by a wide range of stakeholders, traders, LPs, the protocol developers, projects with listed tokens, and layer ecosystems, which may be surprising, though, is that all of this value goes right to the LPs, not to any of the other participants. As a business, this could make some sense. The LPs, after all, are providing the capital that allows all of the other parties to benefit from it. However, there is evidence to suggest that this type of distribution isn't the best way to keep all parties bought into this system. In any case, this fee distribution might change. Other interests are beginning to demand more of the value generated, which puts LP returns under pressure and leaves the protocol vulnerable to competition. For example, to build Uniswap, the development company, Uniswap Labs raised investor money offering the promise of future monetization. However, because LPs receive all of the volume fees generated by the protocol, Uniswap Labs equity investors do not receive any returns from core protocol activities as of yet. As a result, Uniswap has sought new ways to generate revenue, most notably the introduction of front-end fees. Here, users making swaps on Uniswap's own site will pay volume fees directly to Uniswap Labs. What this means, however, is that a group of users now face two layers of fees, the base trading fees to LPs, and now even more fees going to Uniswap Labs. Much of the imagined value added in the future may be reaped in this manner by Uniswap Labs, the primary entity developing on top of Uniswap. There's nobody at the wheel. Uniswap as a protocol was designed to be effectively headless. It is deployed on a blockchain, and LPs determine how it is going to be used by choosing where to provide liquidity. It's a perfectly fine model in a competitive vacuum or in an ungoverned ecosystem such as Ethereum mainnet. But because LPs are the only party to gain from its use, that's a lot of value left on the table that isn't being picked up by other stakeholders. These parties could have other priorities as to how to manage such a fundamentally essential piece of DeFi infrastructure, and their contribution could be beneficial to Uniswap's success. The inability to steer Uniswap can be frustrating in many ways. For example, projects seeking to get liquidity on their native token have no way to efficiently convince LPs to help. Ecosystem teams need a forcing function to migrate from one stablecoin to another. For liquidity, projects need VC firms to put up capital, or they have to apply for some liquidity mining grants. Autonomous market-based systems can represent a major step forward from permissioned ones, but their functional lifespan increases when all of the participating stakeholders can push these systems towards a durable equilibrium. Governance tokens are ostensibly a way for these different parties to do so, but their application across DeFi, including Uniswap, has often been suboptimal. The Uni token is near useless, and that's the best case scenario. Uniswap introduced Uni for two reasons: to enable the compensation of Uniswap Labs and its investors, and to provide additional incentivization to LPs to fend off SushiSwap. Yes, people forget that it was originally used for liquidity mining, confirmation of the weaknesses of the model identified above. For several years, Uni has acted as a governance token with two major functions. The first is to distribute the large Uni allocation granted to the Uniswap Foundation, Uni's DAO. The second is eventually to activate the exhaustively discussed fee switch. The thing is, no Uni holders currently get any value out of holding Uni. As a result, it is prohibitively expensive and risky to accumulate the token for control of the DAO treasury, which could theoretically be used to direct LPs in a way that best meets the market. The makeup of Uniswap's governance exhibits little of this. So, what has Uni in fact been good for? For Uniswap's lab to fund its operations by selling it, and for Uniswap Foundation to administer a grant program while operating its own budget of millions. The Uniswap Foundation alone has sold approximately $60 million worth of Uni token through brokers to fund its operations and grants. Activating the fee switch would certainly do more to get stakeholders involved and maintain the fundamental value of the Uni token, although there have been a range of theories proposed as to why this hasn't occurred. Less discussed is the fact that fee distribution is a zero-sum question. If the Uni token gets more fee revenue, that means LPs get less, and as discussed above, LPs can't tolerate less and will seek better opportunities. So Uniswap is in a bit of a limbo. No fee switch, Uni remains limited in value, and the DEX economy remains rudderless. And should the Uniswap Foundation activate the fee switch, the entire system's liquidity is at risk of being sapped by a competitor. Let's talk about Curve, a decentralized autonomous business. Innovations, real governance, real value accrual. Curve first emerged as an alternative AMM focused on stablecoin swaps, which are difficult to maintain on Uniswap's V2 pool. The contributing team have since iterated on their AMM models and provided genuine technological advancements. More relevant to our topic here, how to bootstrap and sustain a DEX are Curve's economic innovations, which expanded the utility of a DEX's native token. CRV, a token you can run a DCF on. One change by Curve handled both the problem of capped LP earnings and the inability to get revenue share without compromising the DEX economy. In addition to giving the LPs fees, give them your native token, but also give them some of the fees back to native token holders. This structure allows LPs to potentially get more than just whatever they generate in fees, and CRV holders could get some piece of fees generated. VE, voted escrow, CRV, a token can run a business on. You can run a business on. Designing a new stakeholdership, the token holders, is tricky. A DEX has only so much value to generate, and if you're going to reward some party other than LPs with fees, they should be people who have a real stake in the protocol's success. How do you enforce this? Get token holders to commit to holding their tokens for some amount of time. In return, give them a cut of fees. Once you have locked your tokens, you're in it. Curve launched in 2020. The fact that there are still many die-hard Curve fanatics today is no accident. They are people who have committed themselves to the ecosystem. Voting and incentivization. LPs, up to this point, always faced a chicken and egg problem. How do you attract LPs and TVL to the kinds of pools that will best meet the market's demand for tokens? Without any direction, LPs will choose to work with certain pools for any number of reasons. But what's good for LPs might not be best for meeting market demand over time, and it might not be best for the growth of other participants in the surrounding ecosystem. Because LPs on Curve receive some portion of fees and CRV emissions, it becomes necessary to determine how much CRV each pool is going to get to reward LPs, and it would be very hard to do so programmatically. Curve turned this challenge into an opportunity, handling this responsibility to VE CRV holders. The idea was that VE, CRV holders being committed to the ecosystem are going to reward pools they assume will be popular to trade on because they stand to get more fee distributions over time. This was a big step forward in allowing market forces to optimize the DEX. Discovering a whole new revenue stream, arguably the most pivotal innovation made by the Curve ecosystem, came from the insight that getting VE CRV holders to vote on a pool has value. These votes are something that token issuers will pay a lot for. This insight, which led to the implementation of voting incentives, created an entirely new marketplace, a liquidity marketplace, which can bootstrap itself almost from scratch. It was a massive hit. New stablecoin issuers such as Abracadabra and Terra deposited enormous capital into the Curve ecosystem, hoping to get more LPs to service their pools. LPs and VE CRV holders benefited tremendously from these deposits. The hyped Curve wars resulted from a number of protocols competing to acquire VE CRV and the rewards it offered. This was a huge shot in the arm for DEXs and for DeFi. If rewards to AMM LPs now carry the option of a cut of new revenue streams, other DEXs will have a harder time drawing them away. But more generally, this development expanded the definition of a DEX away from just being an AMM. Specifically, if a DEX and its token holders are able to get access to new revenue streams, imagine what else is possible. Curve's introduction of CRV USD clearly thinking along these lines is just the start. What's possible is something we'll leave to the next installment of this series. Issues. A business with many interests. It's indisputable that Curve forever changed the shape of both DEXs and DeFi thoughts. Its radical approaches, however, holding it back have been challenges that are ancient in nature. Stakeholder issues. Hostile takeovers. Curve's structure has left fragile to behavior from participants rationally acting in their self-interest, ultimately stressing sustainability. We can trace this back to the Curve wars, which despite a large amount of hype, ended almost immediately. Why? Because a handful of entities already scooped up the vast majority of CRV, particularly Convex. Most of the protocol's value has been accounted for, making it much more difficult to bootstrap, except at great cost, a sizable position and a hot liquidity engine. These protocols own 75% of the VECRV. Each of these protocols charges a performance fee of between 15 to 20%, which goes to various other parties, team treasuries, or incentivization of particular pools. Regardless of what these protocols did, users seeking to participate in Curve's ecosystem thus are likely to have to interact with it through these other protocols, which may have interests that are not in line with the success of the protocol's health. Overuse of unaligned contractors limiting an organization's value generation. Convex Finance was digital alchemy, answering the question, what if you could make this supposedly locked VECRV position liquid and economically useful? It was a revelation that spawned several new features and an enormous amount of speculative interest, and Curve's structure gave Convex participants a good deal. Get the kind of real yield generated through the two revenue streams, but with greater capital efficiency, because you're not locking up capital to do so. This development arguably undermined Curve in three ways. One, it broke the incentive alignment that you get with VECRV holders being locked into the system. Although early lockers could and did remain involved, late entrants were free to enter and exit through the use of Convex's liquid tokens. Two, it centralized agency and various kinds of risk to an entirely new protocol, which effectively ceded control. The introduction of Convex fragmented the community into different classes of stakeholders, some not wholly aligned with VECRV holders. 3. It atomized user experience. Some functions were now outsourced to new UIs, splitting protocol participants across several different sites. More broadly, this set a precedent of several new follow-on protocols piggybacking on Convex, each with their own fee cut, each with new centralization and security risks. This has been done in the name of composability, the idea that new builders can easily add new features to an existing system and generate new value for the overall system. But what are VECRV holders getting out of this? And increasingly eaten into pie. Just like Uniswap's LPs face a cap in their potential earnings and could potentially see them cut into by Uni token holders, VECRV holders risk seeing these outside teams capture an outsized portion of the value generated. This leaves an opportunity for a new entrant to promise all of the value generated by the protocol to token holders, offering a strictly better deal and taking away the native protocol LPs. There's a lot of fundamental strength holding up Curve in a highly competitive landscape, though, just as with Uniswap, its moat isn't insurmountable. Principal agent issues. And finally, what happens when your core contributors become massively wealthy early into the life of the protocols? Often in DeFi, a token has a huge run-in price, massively enriching the team and insiders, who then begin to sell their large liquid allocations into the speculative demand. Unfortunately, this often happens very early in the product's life, or even before launch. When these parties' token allocations are large amount of the overall supply in circulation, this puts a major damper on the token's market price. Over time, the team becomes less incentivized to continue working as hard on their project. They are rich, the token is distributed, and unless there is a dominant market position or clear product market fit, it becomes difficult to sustain the interests of either protocol participants or the team. They may fail to attend to emergent alternatives to their core value proposition or miss out on major market opportunities. We are deep admirers of the Curve team. They are dedicated builders. They care about the proliferation of DeFi within the Ethereum ecosystem, and they have not entirely followed this model. The core contributors do continue to work hard and develop new product extensions, and instead of selling his tokens, Curve's Michael Egorov famously lent them out as collateral and borrowed stable coins against them. Egorov and the Curve team are extraordinary. Unfortunately, the incentive structure posed by this type of borrowing is not. Both selling and borrowing against one's position are liquidity events that distort a team's incentives with respect to the protocol's success. What more, Egorov's CRV collateral became a major target for speculators and a talking point for people unsure of the protocol's longevity. But perhaps most consistent with the overall pattern of contributors getting early liquidity into hype is contributors' failure to attend to emergent alternatives to their core value proposition. The below posts are respectively a contributor's admission of lack of knowledge and another contributor's mistaken interpretation of a new entrant's mechanics. And there's an image here between Michael and Fiddy where Michael says, No, sir. Isn't it this? Traders get Velo. LPs get fees from traders. More Velo will get more fees. They farm fake volume. And then underneath that, Fiddy says, I don't understand. Voted escrow 3-3, nor have I ever used Aero or Velodrome. I'm speaking purely from a DEX standpoint since it's a pure V3 fork, which it is not a pure V3 fork. I'll just say that. And I begin again. The contracts may be immutable. However, the market isn't. DEXs need contributors paying special attention to what's around the corner. Where are we now? Uniswap and Curve have for years sat atop the DEX league tables. Despite being majorly different operations with unique innovations and challenges, they're both attempting to answer the same bootstrapping question. How do you get everyone to continue participating on our platform for the long term? There appear to be few unaddressed gaps in their ability to sustain themselves. The value that can be distributed to users is capped. On Uniswap, LPs can only earn what they generate in fees. Uni token holders receive nothing. A privately held company, Uniswap Labs, seems set to receive all undefined upside unlocked by their protocol's function, including additional revenue streams such as front-end fees. Although Curve has two revenue streams and does distribute value to both LPs and token holders, the value that these parties can earn is capped, too, due in part to the large fee capture introduced by third-party protocols such as Convex. A threat to these business models is thus that a DEX could enter the marketplace and offer more value across the user base on the same value propositions. Such a value distributed could attract and keep LPs and users. Community activity is limited. Uniswap's economic activity is determined primarily by raw market forces directing LPs. The Uniswap Foundation has limited scope in how to allocate its resources. Uni token holders don't have a market mechanism enforcing their stewardship because they are unable to receive any of the value generated by Uniswap. Similar in limitation is Curve's community. While this community is a diehard one, it is split across several derivative protocols, each with its own incentive structure. The teams behind the varied derivative protocols often take on the major business development functions DEX needs to stimulate demand for liquidity. Again, those are efforts that may lack coordination or alignment. The token distribution is frequently stacked towards major holders and may stunt the protocol's growth in favor of supporting large interests. There's an opportunity for a DEX to enter the marketplace with a focused community orientation, aligned business development efforts to shape and grow the DEX economy, and a diverse stakeholder base. This approach could offer a compelling alternative to these other networks. Resiliency and outperformance are superior in the long run to simplistic efficiency or captive interests. Protocol teams' alignment is uncertain. It's important to repeat that Uniswap is not singularly Uniswap Labs, and the former's own Uni token allocation is close to the end of vesting. Without revamping fee structures, Uniswap's core protocol has little to offer Uniswap Labs in terms of revenue generation, except to the extent that Uniswap can find new ways to charge users, or, of course, they and their investors can continue to sell their own sizable Uni allocations. It is possible that the work Uniswap Labs is embarking on might, by design, be the kind of work that doesn't benefit Uni holders, LPs, or other users of Uniswap. Like Uniswap, Curve's core contributing team has likely generated the vast majority of its liquidity through token sales and other market operations on their CRV allocations. A large portion of locked VE CRV allocations are set to vest as well. To the extent that contributing team members have continued to lock allocated CRV, they will have participated in the long-term health of the protocol's value generation. But this is only a partial measure. Curve has operated for 4 years without core contributors tracking its success in the market, as shown below. And then we have a diagram by Fiddy, and that was on August 12, 2024 at 5:35 p.m. If you want to find it, it's his handle is FIDDY Research. And I continue. Because of this, a DEX could enter the marketplace with a wholly aligned set of contributing users. These contributors may benefit only when the protocol's long-term sustainability is proven out and will fight to make that happen. Success wouldn't come from contributors who could or would sell project tokens as a primary objective. Rather, these contributors must correctly apprehend the long-term view of a DEX as an enormous value machine, one that is valuable to users, ecosystem projects, and ecosystems themselves. The base team has adopted such a view of its own ecosystem. So this is from Jesse Pollock, and it says, and his handle is new, MICHWILL. So I don't really think about base as a business. It's an economy. And that was at 11:30 p.m. on August 11th, 2024. And I continue. This is difficult work. However, building a DEX in this manner achieves a globally aligned incentive framework that defines an arguably new class of DeFi infrastructure. The next installment will discuss the result of such an effort, the MetaDEX. And so it is my intention, so this is notes after what I've read, to read all of these so that people that haven't taken the time to read it can just listen to it like a podcast, and maybe listen to it over and over, so you can have a deeper understanding of the MetaDEX and Aerodrome, and for that matter, Velodrome. All right, thank you so much. I'll see you on part 2. The token, part 2. September 4th, 2024. Kicking off this series on the MetaDEX, part 1 on DEXs breaks down the business model of a decentralized exchange, DEX, and outlines the core challenges leading DEXs have faced. The MetaDEX's primary design change to address these challenges has been economic, and central to this change has been the token design. To introduce the MetaDEX, it is best to begin by discussing the role of the native token in DEXs. As shown in Curve's example, a native token can have several key uses for a DEX. It can drive enduring usage by rewarding valuable participants, direct value through governance control, and also coordinate behavior by requiring certain actions to unlock functions. A token can act as a powerful unifying element of a DEX economy, balancing the interests of various stakeholders and facilitating the protocol's decentralized management. Thoughtful token design has advanced the MetaDEX beyond previous DEX models, as shown below in the case of Aerodrome. A DEX economy needs a token that can distribute and manage generated value. As a DEX, Aerodrome has the potential to generate enormous value through trading fees and liquidity incentives deposited by the partners on Base. Indeed, Base's growth has allowed Aerodrome to stand out as one of the most productive protocols anywhere on-chain, along with several other DEXs. A major takeaway on Part 1 on DEXs is that a DEX economy built to win requires a token because a token allows the DEX to fully distribute and manage its generated value in a way that keeps users on the platform. Uniswap, whose token does not participate in its economy, is an example of a protocol that lacks this feature. It is unable to prevent LPs from moving to protocols offering more than just trading fees. How best to distribute and manage this value is a complex issue in DeFi. Designing app tokens requires careful consideration of not only legal and regulatory factors, as highlighted in A16Z's insightful piece on the topic, but also competitive and structural concerns. Due to the lack of extensive precedent, no universally superior token models have emerged. Tokens generally offer, at best, some degree of value distribution or management, but rarely both, and rarely to the fullest extent possible. Tokens should fully distribute value. The share of value that goes to a protocol's users is critically important and often overlooked. In a permissionless, decentralized setting, the protocol that most effectively distributes value to its stakeholders in proportion to their contributions will outperform others that do not. This is because users will naturally gravitate towards systems that provide them with the greatest surplus, and offering complete, efficient distributions is in effect the most any protocol can offer. This dynamic is crucial in DeFi and will be explored in more detail in a future discussion. There is plenty of precedent in protocol token models offering partial distribution. PancakeSwap allows cake stakers to participate in a share of fee generation on a subset of pools. Curve distributes fees and incentives across LPs, VECRV, voters, and additional layers such as Convex. But for the most part, DeFi protocols reserve fees within a DAO treasury and promise token holders they'll get access to this treasury in some way. All of these structures present major limitations for token holders, who often have no direct influence in how value is distributed, and in several cases do not see the vast majority of value that is generated. All too often, DAO treasuries become captured by insiders and vendors without regard for the project's long-term health. Distributing all value to participants over even insiders is an exceedingly rare feature in DeFi. Of the top 10 most productive DeFi dApps, only 2 distribute all produced value to token holders, Aerodrome and Velodrome. Tokens should manage value. Another precondition for an effective token model is the token's ability to manage generated value in a way that encourages active participation by holders. The thinking here is twofold. Passive stakeholdership isn't of much use in decentralized systems. Businesses have a purpose for passive equity holders or lenders. They provide capital so that executives and their employees can carry out a business plan on their behalf. Fully decentralized systems, however, have little need for any central agents to conduct business, and correspondingly, there is little need for a class of capital provider that does little else for the system. Token holders receiving distributions are likely to act in ways that maximize the protocol's value generation in the long term. Even when systems are fully decentralized, they may benefit from human intervention and decision-making in the way that markets can act as effective optimizers. Having a class of long-term token holders that receive value distributions is helpful when these token holders are given some control over key protocol functions. Because these token holders are highly incentivized to maximize their distributions over time as a group, they should act for the protocol's benefit. The advantage is clear compared to passive token holders who would have little reason to remain engaged in their protocol's functions. The upshot here: in effective token models, token holders are just another class of user operating a protocol to their own ends. Token design that accounts for specific token holder roles remains a highly underplowed design space in DeFi. Among the top 10 most productive DeFi dApps, once again, only 2 require active participation to receive distributions: Aerodrome and Velodrome, the 2 leading examples of the MetaDEX. The MetaDEX token model both fully distributes and manages value. MetaDEX takes a novel approach, one aligned with stakeholder capitalism and A16Z's recommendation that participation be required to share in value distribution. On Aerodrome, 100% of the value generated from fees and incentives is distributed to VE Aero voters permissionlessly and immutably on a weekly basis. Value management. To be eligible for those distributions, VE Aero holders must perform their essential role for the protocol, which is to direct Aero emissions to the liquidity pools on the DEX. This model allows for the fair and predictable distribution of protocol value, removing space for arbitrary decision-making observed in DAOs and developer teams. In its place, VE Aero voters perform well-defined tasks to most efficiently manage the protocol. MetaDEX tokens in depth. Aero, the engine's fuel. Aero is Aerodrome's native token. It is a standard ERC20 token and has no unique capabilities. Its primary role is to distribute value across the entire Aerodrome economy. Every week, the protocol directs a pre-programmed amount of Aero emissions to liquidity pools to attract liquidity providers, LPs, and compensate them for the risk they take on. In return, the system builds up deep liquidity to generate trading fees for Aerodrome. Upon receiving Aero, LPs have several ways they can use it to their benefit. They can simply hold the Aero in their wallets, redeposit as liquidity for Aero pools, swap it for other tokens, or perform a unique action available only with Aero, locking it as a vote escrowed Aero or VE Aero. Locking Aero for VE Aero. Aero's second role is to grant its holder the option of locking it as a VE Aero and performing tasks in exchange for a share of value generated by Aerodrome. When holders lock, they receive an NFT that represents the VE Aero. The duration of the lockup determines the amount of VE Aero that the NFT controls. The calculation for the amount of VE Aero is VE Aero equals Aero. The time remaining in the lock over 4 years. There's a formula here. It's tough to just verbally say. For example, locking 100 Aero for 1 year creates an NFT that controls 25 VE Aero. This 25 VE Aero decreases linearly to 0 as time passes. At any point, users have the option to extend the lock period for their VE Aero NFT up to 4 years, which adjusts the VE Aero amount to match the total Aero locked. Additionally, users can lock more Aero into the same NFT. To simplify this process, Aerodrome provides an auto-lock function that automatically relocks Aero for the maximum 4 years. Once the lock expires, the NFT's owner can redeem it for the original amount of Aero locked plus accumulated bonuses throughout the lock duration. No net Aero is created or destroyed. How a voter participates in the MetaDEX is up to them. As detailed below, what a VE Aero voter gets out of Aerodrome depends on how they choose to use it. VE Aero, a strategic responsibility. If Aero exists as the reward token, VE Aero is what gives control over the rewards. VE Aero holders have a special responsibility in the Aerodrome economy. They have the opportunity to direct a share of emitted Aero toward any pool for rewarding LPs. In return, each week they receive 100% of fees and incentives generated by the pools they've directed Aero to. Because VE Aero holders only benefit from the pools they vote for, they are motivated to make strategic decisions in contrast to VECRV voters who receive a share of the entire DEX's fees and incentives regardless of their actions. Giving individual voters a stake in their choices provides a vital coordination mechanism reflecting the highly diverse priorities of Aerodrome's distributed holder base. Different stakeholders, such as partner protocols, funds, and larger investors like Coinbase Ventures, each have unique motivations. For example, some focus on supporting specific pools, while others aim to maximize liquid rewards. This alignment of interest ensures that market forces drive efficient outcomes with voters supporting pools that align with their goals and receiving the specific benefits they seek. VE Aero, a moat. It is in part Aerodrome's ability to cater to users' specific needs that has given it a noticeably broad VE Aero holdership among similar DeFi protocols. Holder distribution. Aerodrome, Curve, Pendle, PancakeSwap, Convex, Velodrome. As the number and breadth of VE Aero holders grow, so does Aerodrome's economic resilience. The community's stake in Aerodrome's success makes it central infrastructure that attracts and retains participants, reducing the appeal of competing DEXs. Switching to a competitor would require significant effort and loss of ongoing participation in Aerodrome's economy, making it an unattractive option. Moreover, because Aerodrome distributes 100% of its value to participants and does so in a way where individual participants are able to dial in their preferred outcomes, it becomes difficult for competitors to offer more compelling incentives. This broad participation strengthens Aerodrome's position as the leading DEX, creating a formidable moat that is challenging for rivals to overcome. This is the key to the protocol's resilience. Refreshing the stakeholdership. Token locks for governance helps build a dedicated community, but rigid lock terms can alienate members who prefer flexibility. Non-transferable locks also prevent the community from refreshing itself with new committed users. While stability is important, a healthy economy needs some fluidity to maintain engagement. Aerodrome solves this by wrapping VE Aero as a transferable NFT, allowing users to sell their locked position. This flexibility attracts a broader range of participants and reduces the need for derivative layers that extract value. By enabling exits through sales, the system keeps the community dynamic and engaged, ensuring that new buyers are committed to the protocol. Just like any community, the MetaDEX is strongest when it evolves with the times. VE Aero voters are the last word. Because Aerodrome is a decentralized protocol, VE Aero voters should be understood as the primary stewards of the protocol's operation and longevity, as well as the primary beneficiaries, with no other insider group being privileged. In fact, even core contributors who helped to build and shape Aerodrome are not treated as a separate entity from VE Aero voters. They are VE Aero voters, funding their operation from continuously locked VE Aero positions. This radical alignment between core contributors and other protocol stakeholders is virtually without precedent in conventional organizations or even on-chain protocols. Typically, teams are tasked with building and maintenance in exchange for vested tokens. Ultimately, funding their operation through token sales or other sorts of value extraction. This alignment also follows from the logic of decentralized organizations. If there is only a limited role for a centralized team in the long term, then there should be limited privilege for such a team. Offering limited privilege has two benefits. First, compensating core contributors in a non-privileged way reaffirms their role as nothing more than power users. Limiting Principal agent issues. Equally important, it allows for redundancy in team contributions. In this arrangement, other teams can work on the protocol with the promise of benefiting in a manner similar to the first, reducing reliance on the original contributorship. The result, an open organization, endlessly adoptable and fully in the service of its users. Emissions are a key part of the MetaDEX economy. The MetaDEX token model is central to its outperformance among DEXs and to its radical adherence to decentralization and incentive alignment. Equally central is its compensation model through Aero emissions. The next installment will discuss these emissions, exploring their integral role in the MetaDEX economy and layer ecosystem. The end. Part 4 on sustainability. Why our missions are not to be feared. Introduction. Part 1 on DEXs, we examined how decentralized exchange models fail to balance the needs and interests of liquidity providers, traders, and token holders, the so-called DEX trilemma. In Part 2 on the token, we introduced the MetaDEX approach of token primacy, explaining why an intelligently designed token can unify these stakeholders. In Part 3 on issuance, we saw how emission-driven token distribution dilution helps bootstrap and retain users, but must be thoughtfully structured to avoid purely inflationary pitfalls. Now, in Part 4, we introduce emissions in the MetaDEX model and tackle an often asked question: how can emissions exceed near-term fee revenue indefinitely while supporting a DEX's growth? TLDR. Emissions deepen liquidity, which lead to higher volume, which leads to more fees than competition. 100% fee distribution and governance leads to lockers capturing future productive growth, which leads to LPs receiving maximum value generated by the DEX. Emissions cushion yields in downturns by giving an option of future fees, which leads to durable liquidity. Emissions used to compensate LPs are not short-term incentives that can be exhausted. A perpetual premium above revenue can sustain and even amplify long-term growth. Number 1, economic foundations of DEX value distribution. Liquidity, volume, and the value flywheel. All DEXs share a core goal: maximizing trading volume by offering superior trade execution. LPs supply tokens that traders demand in return for earning a share of fees. Traders pay to swap tokens as volume grows. The DEX captures more value, which can be reinvested to improve liquidity and user experience. This cyclical process can compound over time. LPs commit capital to facilitate trades. Traders pay fees and benefit from better trade execution. Protocol captures and distributes the generated fees. LPs reinvest their gains, attracting more LPs and volume. The sustainability of this process hinges on the DEX's ability to retain LPs who form the backbone of value creation. Fee-based DEXs and the competitive market structure. DEXs such as Uniswap that compensate LPs solely through fees face constraints because of their inability to give today's LPs a stake in tomorrow's trading fees. As a result, in low volume or nascent markets, low fees discourage LP participation. In bearish conditions, LPs exit rapidly, sparking a cascade of capital flight. This dynamic also creates winner-takes-most outcomes. As multiple liquidity pools support trading for the same tokens, those with greater liquidity can offer lower slippage, allowing them to win a higher share of trading volume. Higher volume results in more fees for LPs, which attracts more liquidity as LPs from lagging pools shift their capital to the winning pools to capture the higher yield offered, thereby reducing lower volume pools' capacity to capture more volume. And then there's a diagram on the essay. The relationship between TVL and yield follows typical market logic. Consequently, the primary objective of a DEX is market share. It survives by consistently attracting the majority of liquidity away from competing DEXs. And because competing DEXs can trivially, if not necessarily sustainably, offer short-term incentives to outpay and draw liquidity away from others, a DEX must offer more than just fees to retain LPs in a sustainable manner. Tokens mobilize a DEX's productivity to retain LPs. Absent short-term incentives, including external subsidies, the best available means of retaining liquidity is for a DEX to compensate LPs with the DEX's productive value, not just today's trading fees, though also a claim on future trading fees. This claim can be encoded into a token. A token that provides an option to participate in a DEX's future cash flow can be called a capitalized stake in the protocol, allowing LPs to capture upside as the DEX scales, lists new pools, and generates additional sources of fees. In this way, today's fees are transformed into a token that can provide present and or future value, thereby vastly outcompeting DEXs that only offer LPs the trading fees currently being generated by the DEX. Trading fees pass directly to LPs without the ability to harness the protocol's total productive value, fail to incentivize liquidity retention as a result, are wasted. Future productivity provides value today. Incentivizing contributors with a stake in the protocol's growth is not a novel concept in finance or even in everyday life. Consider community-supported agriculture memberships, which often allow participants to purchase or work for fractional shares of a farm's output, earning both produce and potentially a portion of revenue from surplus sales. By actively working on the farm, CSA, community-supported agriculture, members not only receive goods but also gain rights to an ongoing revenue stream that can exceed their wage value if market demand grows over time. This structure adds to members' compensation some upside potential rather than offering a fixed paycheck tied only to the present value of their work. Here, members retrieve the full economic value of their contributions, not just a market wage. 2. Why does a DEX token need 100% value distribution? Solving the DEX trilemma. A DEX must align and balance the incentives of stakeholders. Part of the DEX trilemma is balancing the need of traders who want low slippage, LPs who want high yields, and token holders who want utility and full economic value for their contributions to the DEX. Some protocols, such as Curve, split fees between contributors and LPs, an improvement on solely passing fees to LPs, but not one that fully aligns all stakeholders because it fails to imbue the token with the protocol's full productive capacity. In some cases, partial fee share can even leave LPs worse off than if they had just received fees. In contrast, the MetaDEX distributes 100% of fees to token holders who elect to participate in the ecosystem by locking their tokens. This approach maximizes the value of payments by granting option value of both current and future fees. Also, grants liquidity providers not just access to fees generated by traders, though other value streams generated by the DEX. Also, is a result the only dominant strategy in a competitive environment. Total fee distribution is the winning strategy. A DEX token that gives holders the option to share in the entire ecosystem's output rather than merely a share of trading fees is more efficient than any partial fee distribution because it has incorporated the entirety of the protocol's productive capacity. And assuming that the DEX generates more value in the future, tokens participating in its lifetime value will be worth more than fees captured over a single period, particularly when there are separate revenue streams also captured by the token. This increased efficiency, which incentivizes sustained LP participation when combined with the winner-take-most nature of DEXs, explains why the MetaDEX is the only durable solution. Why 100% fee distribution is the optimal solution is straightforward. Full fee distribution maximizes the token's capitalizable fee base because 100% of the fee stream is directed to participants using the token to contribute to the protocol. All emissions to LPs then become more useful minted tokens based on the fee base. Result: both groups, LPs and token lockers, end up with higher payoffs than in partial fee scenarios. Offering anything less than 100% of fees leaves LPs worse off and the protocol vulnerable to losing LPs to other DEXs. An example of payoffs to both LPs and token lockers, assuming no growth. Goal: maximize LP payouts sustainably. And there's a diagram above. In fact, we see that across different levels of dilution, LPs are best off getting either all fees or all emissions, owing to the complete distribution of fees to token voters. No intermediate amount works better. Total distribution happens elsewhere in network tokens. The MetaDEX full fee distribution and emission model follows a long-established tradition of L1s tying a token's utility directly to its generated value. Just as Ethereum or Solana treat their native assets as claims on all network production, the MetaDEX token has a claim to the 100% of the protocol's revenue, and as such can't be understood as an external incentive. However, this kind of distribution is novel among large DeFi protocols. Among the top earning protocols across crypto, MetaDEXs have peers only in the L1s in directing all generated value to the token. Most DeFi opts for, at best, partial revenue distribution or full control of a DAO treasury, limiting tokens' functional value in their systems. Understanding the token is critical for understanding a protocol's value flows. 3. Emissions with the MetaDEX. Why emissions? From part 3, we know tokens are best distributed or diluted via emissions, a mechanism that rewards contributors at the time of their participation, rather than selling tokens to early investors or handing them out in large pre-minted chunks. The MetaDEX mints new tokens as an ongoing incentive for LPs and lockers. This ensures 1. Sustainable compensation. Unlimited emissions on a schedule prevents concerns about running out of allocated tokens and requiring a cumbersome redistribution of tokens later on. 2. Optimal realignment of control. The more a DEX thrives, by way of higher volume and liquidity, the more emissions rewards go to these fueling that growth. Emissions are not free money. No matter how it's done, a grant of a proportional stake in something is in fact a transfer of ownership from some parties to other parties, just like reassigning shares by taking from one holder's allocation and giving it to another. Emissions bring about a recarving of the same pie. New tokens come into circulation, reducing the relative share of anyone not receiving these tokens. Emissions in this system are not some outside incentive that stand to run out. You can always reallocate without changing the substance of the pie. In a conventional business, you might see insiders or early investors being protected from dilution. Here, the concept is inverted. Currently contributing LPs and lockers are the ones gaining newly issued tokens, steadily increasing their share of the protocol relative to those who are not participating. Your stake depends on your continued contribution. This keeps maximum value in the hands of those who drive volume and add liquidity, forming the cornerstone of what we call constructive dilution. Dilution that maximally facilitates growth. 4. Constructive dilution. Who is diluting whom? Active versus passive participants. Because emissions favor those who provide capital or otherwise contribute to the ecosystem, inactive token holders inevitably see their proportion decline if they fail to participate. Over time, the protocol's decision-making and fee distribution shift towards active stakeholders who are both fueling and benefiting from the MetaDEX's growth. In this way, incentives are matched to efforts, a long-standing target in organizational design. LPs are the primary service provider and the primary beneficiary of issuance. Liquidity provision is the DEX primary source of real value creation. Without liquidity, no trades can happen, and this service does not come cheap, as LPs demand compensation to take on capital risk. Moreover, in a competitive setting, a DEX must give the maximum possible value to LPs to avoid being outbid. Thus, the larger share of token flows to LPs in exchange for their service of enabling trades. LPs then have the option of liquidating their tokens or locking them. If they choose to participate by locking and voting for pools, they receive fees and additional governance influence, reinforcing their stake. Voters have the option to stay or let others contribute more. MetaDEX voters are a unique stakeholder class. They receive all value generated by the protocol, paid weekly as incentives for voting and directing emissions. They also gain a slight anti-dilutive distribution in the form of vote rebases. Voters are not providing a service to the MetaDEX in the same way LPs are, as they are invested directly in the pool's growth, and they have a choice to continue participating or not. Fundamentally, their shares of the pie are either maintained or increased through their continued participation. The key here, as shown in the example above, emissions are in their interest because they enable growth by directing emissions to particular pools. Voters are making a bet that this pool will grow in volume, generating more revenue back to them. If they choose not to compound their participation and increase their vote power, they will see their share erode. Once again, active participation is not just incentivized, but required. Non-participating token holders play a role. Although emissions prioritize LPs and lockers, passive token holders who simply hold the liquid token also serve an important function. By buying, selling, or otherwise using the token in broader DeFi, including lending, borrowing, or even pairing it in a liquidity pool, they establish the token's price, effectively conducting real-time price discovery of MetaDEX's future prospects. This market-based valuation is critical. It allows new participants to enter at a fair price and gives existing token holders an ever-present option value tied to the protocol's long-term growth. In other words, even if they are not capturing emissions or fee revenue, liquid holders create liquidity for the token itself, benefiting the ecosystem by ensuring an efficient marketplace for participation in the MetaDEX's future production and giving LPs the option of selling their emissions. At all times, liquid holders retain the freedom of transitioning from passive to active, locking or providing liquidity with the token, avoiding dilution by future emissions, and sharing more directly in the MetaDEX's success. 5. The rate of dilution. Emissions across market conditions and the MetaDEX Fed. Dynamic emissions. Calibrating the dilution rate to expected growth is of major importance in any issuance scheme. Too many emissions and you overspend. Too few and you don't have enough stimulus. And even the most well-tuned emission schemes cannot anticipate significant changes in liquidity demand and near-term growth expectations. In response, the MetaDEX Fed enables lockers to vote weekly, plus or minus 1 BIP, to raise or lower emissions, adjusting the flow of newly minted tokens based on present conditions. High emissions, bootstrap, new liquidity, or new markets can be crucial during rapid expansion phases. More aggressively recycles ownership away from passive participants to active ones, so there must be enough market desire to participate to support emissions. Lower emissions mitigate oversupply and help sustain token value if the community thinks growth is plateauing or has become less resource intensive. Existing stakeholders remain more in control. However, ability to bring in new participants lessens. Lockers have the greatest stake in the MetaDEX long-term success. Will find a balance between attracting LPs to productive pools and sacrificing too much of their own stakes for not enough upside. This is an adaptive market-based feedback loop that offsets the classic pitfalls of one-size-fits-all emission schedules. So far, the emissions rate for Aerodrome, for instance, has aligned well with the ecosystem's needs. This is reflected in the DEX's growth, which has far eclipsed emissions growth. This suggests that the emissions rate has effectively brought in new participants capable of growing the protocol. And then there's a diagram that says voting rewards and volume / arrow emitted. Resilience in downturns. Liquidity retention during slow trading periods is a significant challenge for traditional DEXs. When trading volume declines, the fees earned by LPs decrease, causing some providers to withdraw their liquidity. This can lead to further reductions in volume and liquidity, creating a vicious cycle that destabilizes the pool and the broader DEX. By issuing tokens on a predictable schedule, a DEX can smooth out the yield that LPs receive. This mitigates the uncertainty of fluctuating trading volumes and averts negative feedback loops in which liquidity vanishes in adverse market conditions. Even when trading activity dips, LPs still collect token emissions as built-in soft floor on yields, helping to sustain liquidity until volumes rebound. And then there's a diagram that says daily volume fees on base, and has a comparative analysis between volume and Aero. Smoother Aero emissions relative to fee generation can help to support LPing. A smooth token emission schedule means that when volume and fees temporarily drop, token rewards still flow, preventing a liquidity exodus that could spiral the DEX downward. Furthermore, when alternative DEXs struggle under these conditions, the MetaDEX picks up their LPs. This may lead to a ratcheting effect where the MetaDEX takes more market share during challenging times and then keeps it during better times. There's another diagram of the tokens BRET and AIXBT. The illustration shows the common math to market dominance as shown historically by BRET and AIXBT. 6. Emissions can always exceed fees. Relating fees, emissions, and expectations. A key feature of the MetaDEX design is that token emissions value in some period can exceed fee revenue, crucial for attracting LPs from fee-only DEXs without compromising sustainability. While issuing more token value than fees collected may seem counterintuitive, this misunderstands the MetaDEX's structural advantages, which explicitly tie emissions to future growth. That is, emissions are drawing on future revenue to support today's growth. A typical fee-only DEX cannot easily offer rewards higher than what it earns now. The MetaDEX, however, leverages a token that captures future productivity. Investors evaluate this token based on the discounted forward cash flows it can capture, a concept familiar to financial analysts. The protocol cannot control this evaluation, it can just control the rate of issuance. The MetaDEX diverges critically from traditional equity dilution here. Unlike many equity issuance schemes which dilute passive shareholders and may fall prey to agency issues without directly linking to value creation, the MetaDEX emits tokens exclusively to liquidity providers, rewarding them for actions that directly grow the protocol's fee base. This transforms dilution from a cost with often uncertain outcomes into a positive sum growth engine, a feature that is necessary to support this dilution model. For example, suppose a DEX currently collects $1 million in annual fees and trades at 10x fees for a $10 million market capitalization. If the protocol issues $2 million in new tokens to attract more liquidity and fees double in the next period to $2 million, the market capitalization doubles to $20 million, holding growth expectations constant. Here, the market capitalization has outpaced dilution, leading to a much higher potential emissions value at the same level of dilution. Emissions remain sustainable in this example because the DEX's market cap grows in tandem with its fees at the same valuation multiple. The only immediate constraint is the DEX's ability to continue growing its fee base at a higher rate than it is expanding supply, and the MetaDEX Fed can adjust the dilution rate as needed, ensuring token issuance doesn't surpass the protocol's growth prospects. The key insight: token-based value distribution creates efficient mechanisms for converting future revenue potential into present growth, removing traditional constraints on sustainable expansion. Visualizing the relationship between fees and emissions. A simple theoretical model bears this out. If a protocol generates F fees this year, grows annually by G, and dilutes annually at D, we see the following with the protocol level discount rate. And it does formulas here, which are going to be difficult to communicate by reading and narrating. But basically it says 1, market cap, M, is valued at the present value of the fee stream. And then it says 2, emissions value. And then 3, to ensure emissions exceed fees required to be fee-based DEXs. So if you want to look on the article, you will see that about 3/4 of the way down. And we are in essay number 4. So I'm going to continue. That is, growth must exceed the protocol level discount rate. Practically speaking, this is identical to positive NPV test for capital expenditure planning and corporate finance. But here, what is being shown is that emissions can exceed fees indefinitely, so long as growth in these fees will be greater than the cost of capital. One might say that growth can't always exceed the cost of capital, and this is true. But as fees compound and market share is consolidated, the protocol scales down dilution, while riding the industry's broader growth trajectory. Over time, expectations converge towards mature benchmarks, very similar to global GDP, and a track record suppressor, all while emissions continue to outpace fee generation. This equilibrium is more robust than the former, aligning incentives with actual value creation rather than just market confidence. Caveat: know who is diluting whom. Unlike at the protocol level, where emissions are just a reshuffling of the same entity, at the token holder level, ensuring that growth outpaces one's individual dilution is of primary concern. Different classes of token holders interact differently with dilution. Existing lockers get revenue and rebases. New lockers receive extra incentives through programs such as Aerodrome's flight school, and liquid token holders face the full brunt of dilution. Any one of these token holder types must solve its own optimization to ensure that growth. So think of R as the baseline yield the market demands from the fee stream itself. Every holder then adjusts that by the dilution or anti-dilution they actually experience for any token holder class. The after dilution hurdle is determined by R equals R plus D minus G minus B. And there's a diagram which you can see on the essay, where D is the class-specific dilution and B is the class-specific yield earned, including or revenue payouts or bonuses. Each player must satisfy its own inequality. But if the protocol tunes emissions, buybacks, and bonuses such that this holds for all cohorts, while overall G is greater than D, the system can continue issuing tokens whose market value forever outruns current fees without eroding per token economics. 3 conditions for sustainability. To summarize, this equilibrium requires the below conditions to hold. If these 3 statements hold simultaneously, the protocol continue emitting tokens whose dollar value exceeds current fees without eroding per token economics or driving any cohort to exit. Per token value accrual. G is greater than D. The fundamental value of each token depends on the degree to which fee growth outstrips supply growth. Fees per token effectively expand, and they give a formula. If G is greater than D, then each token's claim on the fee base grows. If G is less than or equal to D over some horizon, inflation may swamp growth, undermining sustainability. 2. Emission sustainability. G greater than R. This ensures newly minted tokens in dollar terms exceed the current year's fee revenue, tying emissions to future revenue growth. Growth G is able to meet the cost of capital R, which allows the market to price emissions in excess of the fees they are facilitating. If the protocol's fee base expands sufficiently, the market can accept larger annual token issuance today. 3. Token holder return premium. R is greater than bench. After dilution and growth, each class of token holder must earn its hurdle rate. This hurdle is likely most pronounced for liquid token holders, though all token holders must be satisfied by revenue growth relative to their share to offset their internal cost of capital. A final note beyond fees and emissions. A simple fee minus emissions approach might declare a protocol unprofitable if token issuance surpasses current fees. Under an emission scheme like the MetaDEX, this view is misguided. Emissions are an investment in usage. When fee growth materializes, these upfront costs catalyze further expansion. In practice, the MetaDEX success hinges on credible growth and dominance and adaptive governance. Many emissions-based DEXs failed not because the math was broken, however, due to factors such as following. 1. Stagnant growth or dominance. Low growth leads to higher perceived risk, which leads to inequality, G greater than R, not to sustain. This has occurred often with DEXs that could not credibly establish themselves as dominant players. 2. Partial fee capture. Weak incentives or a poor value proposition lead to insufficient revenue. 3. Rigid governance. Emission schedules can't adjust quickly when market conditions change. The MetaDEX sidesteps these pitfalls by design. Emissions act as a temporal reallocation of future value creation, converting long-term fee potential into immediate liquidity. With the MetaDEX, if growth is expected to slow, the MetaDEX Fed dials down D. If growth soars, token holders are confident that tomorrow's higher revenue justifies today's emissions. And in all cases, there are structural buyback programs that redirect excess emissions towards further growth. Historically, MetaDEXs have shown consistent market share acquisition within ecosystems and against centralized exchanges, positioning the MetaDEX model for secular growth against broader cyclical conditions. Even if protocol use eventually converges with crypto-level growth and eventually GDP-level growth, a track record of performance and fee expansion in line with a well-managed emission strategy will enable the protocol to continue to succeed. To summarize, a traditional approach might measure annual fees minus annual emissions in dollar terms and label a protocol as unprofitable if emissions exceed fees. That neglects the reality that emissions are, economically speaking, a capital investment directly incentivizing liquidity and unlocking future fee growth. By contrast, the three-condition framework is forward-looking, incorporating discount rates, growth, and dilution. In a dynamic equilibrium, emissions can surpass current revenue if investors remain convinced that the protocol's future usage will repay that advance. Conclusion: emissions trade productive value for growth. The MetaDEX blend of 100% fee distribution, locking, and dynamic emissions creates a sustainable competitive foundation for market dominance in a winner-take-most environment. 1. Emissions encourage liquidity. 2. Deeper liquidity improves execution and grows volume. 3. Higher volume generates more fees. 4. All fees flow to voters holding locked tokens. 5. Tokens can tune emissions to meet liquidity demands. 6. System remains resilient, even if emissions outpace near-term revenue. Through constructive dilution, the protocol continuously rewards active participants, aligning liquidity providers and token holders around the MetaDEX's future success. Meanwhile, a programmatic, immutable emission schedule prevents reckless overissuance, and automatic stabilizer-like market forces avert catastrophic liquidity collapses during downturns. In this way, overpaying in emissions is not a reckless giveaway, however, a rational investment in the protocol's long-term growth. The end.
Alignment, Part 5. Part 5 on alignment, April 24th, 2025. In Part 1, on DEXs, we examined how previous decentralized exchange models fail to balance the needs and interests of liquidity providers, traders, and token holders, the so-called DEX trilemma. In part 2 on the token, we introduced the MetaDEX token model and laid out the proposition that tokens must manage and distribute a protocol's productive value to be maximally useful. In part 3 on issuance, we explored how emissions and dilution reallocate proportional control and provided a framework for how to evaluate issuance programs in decentralized settings. In part 4 on sustainability, we introduced emissions in the MetaDEX model and worked through the conditions under which the MetaDEX's compensation model would be sustainable. Now, we turn our attention to a new design challenge, contributor alignment. How should those who build and maintain a decentralized system be compensated, and how can we ensure their incentives remain tightly coupled to the long-term health of their organizations? This is not a new problem. Most organizations, corporate, cooperative, or decentralized, struggle to balance the needs of 3 distinct groups: teams, who coordinate and build; users, who generate and derive value from the organization; investors, who provide capital. This challenge, which we call the alignment trilemma, has long shaped institutional design. However, in traditional systems, the trade-offs are structural and persistent. As a firm scales, it almost inevitably deprioritizes one of these groups, and it's rarely the teams. Decentralized systems offer an opportunity to break this cycle. Unlike legacy firms, they are not bound by the same limitations. When designed well, they can collapse these stakeholder roles entirely. They can structurally align participants rather than just balance them. However, to date, most DeFi protocols have failed to realize this promise. Many centralize control and treasuries, route value through privileged contributors, and treat users and token holders as community rather than as equals. As these insider-outsider dynamics deepen, these protocols become more extractive and themselves more vulnerable to replacement. In effect, most protocols have recreated the same organizational standards they were meant to replace. Breaking the wheel. The MetaDEX takes a different approach. It channels value directly to contributors through a dedicated VE NFT, a voting position established at launch, perpetually locked and maintained with auto-compounding and programmatic buybacks. In this model, contributors are rewarded the same way as any user, through participation and adding value. This flat and transparent structure enforces alignment and effectiveness. Here, contributors earn liquid, transparent compensation without drawing from stakeholder value. Voting positions acting solely in the protocol's interest grow strategic liquidity and stakeholdership. Existing contributors can be permissionlessly extended or replaced as others step into the same incentive framework. In this installment, we explore how the MetaDEX model addresses the alignment trilemma by structurally integrating contributors, users, and investors. By ensuring that value flows directly to participants based on their engagement and contributions. The MetaDEX is built to outcompete incumbents by delivering superior value to users without compromise. Alignment in organizations. We have written extensively on how to best design an organization in decentralized settings. The general idea, the less need there is for central command, the more value should flow to users. However, in practice, standing up any organization, decentralized or otherwise, requires significant upfront coordination and resources. Even Bitcoin, often held up as the gold standard of decentralization, began with a core team. And any organization with a dedicated team faces the same foundational challenge: how to ensure that the team is acting in the best interests of those it's meant to serve. Economists call this the agency problem, which arises any time one party is empowered to act on behalf of another. This problem's universal. Public companies have boards, audits, and shareholder rights, and they still misallocate capital or chase quarterly earnings at the expense of long-term health. Governments have constitutions, checks and balances, and they still drift towards insider capture or self-serving bureaucracy. Startups and DeFi protocols use vesting schedules and stock options, and they still see early employers cash out long before users see real value or protocols have achieved any durable measure of success. The core issue isn't the lack of structure. The issue is that no structure that separates stakeholders in this way can fully bind incentives to outcomes without trade-offs. This is the pattern the alignment trilemma attempts to formalize, the structural tension between users who want value, stakeholders who want return, and teams who want autonomy and compensation. Prioritize any two, and the third tends to be compromised. The best you can do, it seems, is to design structures with context-appropriate compromises without fully resolving them. Most of the time, the market supports these structures. And there's a diagram in the article about the alignment trilemma. Public corporations structurally separate all three groups. The team works for shareholders, users are monetized, value often flows to insiders and then to investors, often at the cost of users and sometimes at the cost of shareholders themselves when control gets too centralized. Private firms and partnerships collapse the team and stakeholders, aligning incentives more tightly among them. However, they can maintain an adversarial relationship with users. Cory Doctorow's in shitification, the process by which an organization shifts from subsidizing users to extracting from them to drive up earnings, can sometimes accelerate under such structures, such as private equity. Cooperatives and collectives collapse users and stakeholders, giving the people who use the product some claim to control. But they often suffer in execution because the team lacks autonomy or strong upside. Alignment under traditional models. To make this concrete, consider a bike company structured like the diagram below, a standard corporate model, and there is a diagram below. The company took shareholder money to buy raw materials, hire a team to build and sell bikes, and deliver these bikes to users. Any value that goes back to shareholders is mediated by the company itself, managed by its internal actors, the board, executives, and employees. This means that shareholders depend on company insiders to manage and distribute value. To that end, they want to know that the bikes made are going to work, and they want to know that the company is using their resources efficiently and ethically. But because they are removed from day-to-day execution, they rely on disclosures and governance mechanisms to enforce accountability. This common structure separates users, stakeholders, and contributors by default, and in many markets it is dominant, if fragile. Over time, especially in platform economies, this often leads to a shift away from user benefit and towards extraction. As an organization establishes dominance over a market, users' market power decreases, and insider stakeholders will start to demand more value be brought to them. The product's value to users is decreased, optimized to the level the market will bear. This is enshittification, and we know it when we see it. However, in industry contexts allowing for alternative structures, these incumbent organizations may be supplanted by competitors that can align these parties better. Toward integration. As discussed in previous posts, economic systems that can be decentralized or disintermediated don't just allow us to rethink organizational structures, they compel us to. Rather than managing trade-offs between users, stakeholders, and teams, we can now collapse these roles entirely. Users can be owners, builders can be participants, and coordination can happen without centralized permission. This is the real promise of the technology. Not to recreate legacy systems with different branding, however, to build something fundamentally better than what's existed in the past. Massive industries, social media, e-commerce, cloud computing, to name a few, are ripe for overhaul. As coordination costs fall and core infrastructure is commoditized, decentralized products will become increasingly competitive. To succeed in this environment, new industry leaders must ensure from the outset that their interests are structurally aligned with users. Legacy firms can't pursue this without breaking their own organizational models. However, decentralized systems are capable of aligning with users from day one. They must do so because this is the only strategically dominant path. Funding teams. How to provision a team is the first question that must be answered. Any system that seeks to function over time must solve for two conditions simultaneously. The organization needs constant liquid funding to support ongoing contributor work covering salaries, operations, and scaling costs. This compensation must align contributors with the organization's long-term health. Traditional corporate governance literature proposes splitting compensation with salaries for liquidity and equity, which is used to align the team with shareholders. The equity component is often illiquid, subject to vesting schedules, and designed to ensure that upside is only realized if the enterprise succeeds. In theory, this delays gratification and ties contributor success to that of the broader organization. In practice, this structurally is imperfect. Equity on its own isn't an efficient solution and often creates secondary agency problems at both individual and team levels. First, equity generally cannot be the primary source of the team's compensation as it doesn't offer stable liquid income. Moreover, if equity does not distribute revenue, the team must continuously sell its ownership to meet personal expenses. This introduces a tension. The team becomes dependent on external liquidity events, funding rounds, mergers and acquisitions, initial public offerings, which may encourage short-term strategies designed to maximize valuation optics rather than actual value delivery. So equity alone does not eliminate misalignment. Equity compensation may incentivize behavior that harms long-term value, such as focusing excessively on short-term market perception or inflating valuations ahead of key liquidity events. This structure is ostensibly designed for alignment. However, it cannot enforce it. In decentralized systems, these challenges are magnified. Compensation design is not a downstream consideration. It is foundational to whether the system remains governable at all. These trade-offs can be visualized along the two axes of liquidity and alignment. And there's a diagram. It is common for projects to solve for one axis at the expense of the other. They pay quickly and compromise alignment, or they delay payout and potentially starve contributors. Neither model is built to sustain itself. You need more than just tokens. Tokens have long been proposed as a resolution to these issues. Unlike equity, they can be liquid from launch. Unlike salaries, they can be ownership aligned. And unlike venture funding, they allow broad-based participation and decentralized coordination. In theory, everybody is working towards the same outcome. However, in practice, token-based models have generally reproduced or even amplified all of these old agency concerns. When tokens lack legal protections involved with equity or immutable rights to certain functions or distributions, contributing teams have any number of ways to get liquidity on the back of speculators and few obligations to deliver. And there's an image here which references a tweet from 0x Lewis T. An exponentially growing trend, tokens whose only use case is siphoning value from liquidity markets to equity holders, teams, and employees. Stop the double dipping, stop equity extraction, maxing. And underneath that image it says, when tokens go wrong for everyone except insiders. In many cases, these insiders have little reason to do right by outside stakeholders. Either the token doesn't provide any claim to an organization's generated value, the token's power is superseded by overwhelming control by insiders, or there are competing legal interests the insiders must adhere to. In several cases, teams have, in fact, revoked token holders' claims or changed their organizational structure to token holders' disadvantage. All of these present considerable risks to token holders that must be considered. Vesting or deferred compensation often does little to mitigate this phenomenon. Some projects enter into OTC deals with market makers and investors to provide an appearance of the token's desirability. Others sell into hype cycles before any demonstration of product market fit. The vesting process can, in the case of tokens launched at high valuations, lead to several years of relentless exits by the team through private token issuance. And finally, once vesting ends, the team often has limited resources to compensate employees, risking abandonment. There are graveyards full of organizations whose teams became fabulously wealthy through token issuance and cashed out using speculators as liquidity before achieving any enduring market success. Other graveyards nearby are full of organizations whose teams couldn't support their employees, with treasuries comprising native tokens trending to zero. Notable examples abound here. Compound is now run by service providers with little input from a central team. Its direction is uncertain following a founder exit in the 2022s. The team and shareholders were allocated almost half of the protocol's tokens. The protocol was at one point worth $8 billion and currently sits under $400 million. The founder of DYDX, a decentralized exchange, stepped down as CEO in 2024. Within months, citing market conditions, DYDX laid off 35% of staff, saying, "You continued to build DYDX even when I did not." The DYDX token is now functionally abandoned. Insiders and investors received almost 50% of DYDX tokens, which at one point were collectively worth $4 billion. The protocol is still worth over $500 million, and vesting has not completed. After raising over $100 million, the decentralized exchange 0x killed ZRX's initial staking rewards before 0x Labs ceased development on the exchange. The token is functionally abandoned and functionless and sits at $225 million market cap as of this writing. And then there is a diagram underneath it, or there are a bunch of tweets actually. There's an image, and it says market participants are increasingly paying close attention to this phenomenon. And one tweet is from Gabrielle Shapiro, so _ Gabrielle Shapiro, and then it's a 0 at the end. For every project, just give us one fair, equal access way to invest in it with no value leakage. That's it. That will save crypto. End dual equity token model. End conflicts of interest. Let's see, another one. Venture anthropologist, 0x, his handle is 0x Balloon Lover. He says, incentives are incredibly misaligned between token foundations, their employees, and token holders. This is by design. And then Chain Yoda says, the worst drug in crypto is being an employee of a project where the founders have already exited in OTC secondaries. And we begin rereading. What tokens haven't changed is this. Outsiders' value accrual remains mediated by insiders. Insiders still require liquid runway, and outsiders are still essentially betting under imperfect information that insiders will deliver. Tokens may be a powerful primitive. However, without structural constraints, decentralized organizations lose much of the advantage they could have enjoyed over incumbents. Unalignment. Uniswap illustrates the problem of alignment. In its most advanced form, extreme separation between who funds the system, who controls it, and who benefits. Jesse Walden's prescient The Ownership Economy says the following, and this is an excerpt from that. Uniswap, a crypto exchange, has a business model similar to Coinbase or Binance in that it imposes a fee on transactions. However, rather than the company capturing that fee, it's instead distributed to the market-making traders that provide liquidity and make the product useful. Since Uniswap is open source and user-owned, third-party developers can have confidence building on the platform, and a rich ecosystem of integrations has grown around the project. End of excerpt. The rich ecosystem has cost a ton to build and market. Hundreds of people are employed by Uniswap Labs, the centralized development company, and the Uniswap Foundation. Both entities host developer conferences around the world. They've invested in splashy marketing and partnership campaigns. They pay people to build on the Uniswap platform. They routinely incentivize liquidity providers. They have multi-million-dollar bug bounties and audit costs. Without question, they are one of the biggest networks this industry has seen. The core question is, who owns Uniswap and who benefits from the value it generates? To answer this, one must unpack the value flows. And there is a diagram here. And you'll have to look at the article because it's somewhat complex PERT chart, if you will. What we have here is a two-track structure. On one track, real revenue flows to Uniswap Labs and its equity holders. On the other, token holders and speculators fund operations without anything to show for it. That is, there is a one-way flow of value directly to Uniswap and its equity holders and massive value consumption by the Uniswap Foundation. Front-end fees come from traders and token subsidies are issued by the Uniswap DAO and the Uniswap Foundation. Much of the operational burden, hiring, grants, events, is carried by the DAO and Foundation. However, the revenue flows elsewhere. Indeed, equity holders contributed roughly $170 million and earned a structurally enforced claim on revenue. They see an annualized $80 million from front-end fees alone, to say nothing of grants and payments from ecosystem partners in exchange for deployment. And of course, they received 180 million Uni token, which has ranged 900 million and 3.5 billion over the last 4 years. Undoubtedly a home run of an investment. It looks more grim for Uni holders. Despite backstopping over 7 billion in issuance, which has been used to support contributors, grants, and affiliated entities, they have received none of the 3.7 billion in cumulative fees generated by Uniswap. That's right. The market value of Uni's token issuance far exceeds the value the protocol has generated through its use. For all the talk about sustainability and emissions-based models such as the MetaDEX, Uniswap itself has yet to demonstrate that the protocol's economic output justifies its token distribution. In that light, Uni begins to look less like a governance right and more like a transfer mechanism from speculators to insiders. The case of Uniswap is a textbook example of misalignment through structural design. Token holders underwrite the entire ecosystem's development, however, do not share in its success. The team, meanwhile, satisfies its liquidity demands through revenue and token grants. However, its fiduciary duty is to its shareholders, not to token holders. This is a valuable picture of a protocol mimicking corporate structures without replicating their protections. While equity holders have enforceable claims, token holders get tokens. Importantly, some users do benefit. Liquidity providers earn 100% of fees, and traders gain access to deep markets. However, their partition is subsidized. Token holders are funding the infrastructure that enables liquidity providers to get 100% of smart contract fees. In this arrangement, token holders are not partners in the system. However, they are a piggy bank, one that can be continually drawn on without an obligation. And that's the critical lesson. When value flows are intermediated by insiders and token holders lack meaningful rights, alignment fails by design. Speculators fund growth and insiders harvest. The result isn't a new ownership model, it's just the same thing we've had before, potentially even more heavily skewed towards insiders. Aligning interests with the MetaDEX. As argued above, how you doing? As argued above, because a decentralized system must maximize value to users to outcompete alternatives, it must be structurally contained to do so. A design that depends on discretion, however, well-intentioned, cannot guarantee this outcome, and if value to users is not guaranteed, the system's market share will always be vulnerable to capture. The MetaDEX maximizes value to users while satisfying the compensation mandates by treating contributors as users. The founding contributing organization received locked tokens at launch. These tokens can carry a hard-coded claim to protocol revenue distributed weekly. This provides liquidity. However, they are also indefinitely locked, and contributors do not monetize their position through token sales. Their payoff is, like any other token holders, tied solely to the protocol's long-term growth. This enforces alignment. This design also delivers resilience. Teams that depend on emissions, token price, or external capital for runway may function in a bull market, however, collapse under pressure. The MetaDEX is designed to operate through volatility because contributor funding is tied directly to protocol revenue. It remains active regardless of market sentiment. This allows contributors to continue building without needing to sell tokens, rely on grants, or renegotiate their role. In the case of Dromos, this has meant a working treasury, built not by using speculators as liquidity, however, by helping the protocol generate real economic value. Consequently, Dromos North Star is the same as that of the protocols it services. Chase not short-term liquidity, however, pursue long-term growth of our income-producing assets. And because there are no privileged access points, no alternate funding mechanisms, or internal budgets, the system ensures that all participants operate within the same economic frame. This has important implications for how costs are handled. Internalizing system costs. An overlooked, however, critical consequence of the MetaDEX's structure is that operating costs are fully circumscribed by the team's own position in the system. In many protocols, expenses are borne collectively funded through token issuance or grants or out of a central revenue stream. However, are often managed opaquely by a centralized entity. This creates uncertainty around the protocol's profitability and reinforces dependence on the team's judgment and competence in deploying collective resources. The MetaDEX does away with this structure entirely. Contributors' funding is not allocated, however it is earned, directly from protocol revenue, under the same rules as any user. If the system grows, so does their budget. If it contracts, their funding naturally declines. No system-wide budget needs to be managed or overseen by stakeholders because no discretionary budget exists. Locked token holders get the same distributions back no matter how the contributors choose to spend their earnings. In this structure, system costs are bound to contributor wallets. Anyone can see in real time how much protocol revenue is flowing to contributors. This is the limit of the contributor's budget. There is no gap between funding and performance. Every party receives value based on overall systemic growth and their own voting choices. And even external financing is constrained because the contributors' claim to protocol value is limited to their locked tokens. Anyone they theoretically raise funds from would receive exposure only to their locked stake, not to the protocol itself. The incentives of the investors backing the contributors would mirror those of any other token holder to grow long-term revenue, which determines all parties' returns. And then there's a diagram. A look at how the MetaDEX value flows differ from mediated value flows. In fact, this logic is not limited to the founding contributors. Any locked token voter getting its share of protocol revenue has the same structural access to financing from protocol revenues, and some have already begun to use it. For example, Crypto Yield Capital, CYC, is a locked token voter that has secured outside investment to scale its activity in the protocol. Its investors do not receive emissions, control over the system, or access to any privileged stream. They simply receive a share of CYC's cash flows from its voting position. This reinforces the system's symmetry. There are no internal capital classes, only participants earning in parallel. Ecosystem wallets, structural tools for aligned growth. In a system where contributors are structurally aligned with users and incentivized through the same mechanisms, a natural design question emerges: that unique advantages does such an organizational structure bring to a system? What unique advantages does such an organizational structure bring to a system? Users optimize for themselves, and that's mostly a good thing. Within the MetaDEX, users are empowered to do two things: direct protocol emissions through vote lock governance and receive value in return. In most cases, this creates a healthy and efficient loop. Users optimize for their own outcomes, as they should. However, this model has its blind spots. Not everything that benefits the overall system is immediately profitable to vote for. Early-stage assets or strategic positions that lack short-term returns often get overlooked. Supporting these protocols can require redirecting emissions away from more established revenue-generating options, which can be difficult to justify from a self-interested perspective. The public goods wallet, strategic bootstrapper. It turns out the MetaDEX's organizational structure is well suited to such a problem. On launch, Aerodrome introduced the public goods wallet, controlled by the foundations and holding roughly 18% of VEAERO. Its role is clear and constrained. It votes emissions towards assets and pools that are strategically important to the network, however temporarily undersupported by the market. A good example is CBBTC, an asset critical to extending the protocol's reach into Bitcoin native capital. Initially, CBBTC lacked the trading fees necessary to attract emissions, votes, or liquidity providers. With support from the public goods wallet, it quickly bootstrapped deep liquidity and within a week surpassed WBTC as the primary Bitcoin trading vehicle on-chain. Importantly, this wallet generates no private benefit. All emissions it earns are recompounded into more VEAERO. There is no leakage, no discretion over distribution, and no contributor access to funds. It is a system-level flywheel that helps the protocol capture value it would otherwise miss. The Flight School wallet, onboarding new lockers. The second wallet, the Flight School wallet, holds about 8% of VEAERO. It is designed with a different, however equally strategic purpose: to bring new lockers into the system and expand the base of active aligned governance participants. Think of it as a signing bonus for users who begin locking AERO and begin participating in governance. These new lockers help broaden the stakeholder base, increasing the protocol's decentralization and resilience. And unlike the public goods wallet, the Flight School wallet operates with no discretion. It simply votes for the maximum AERO rewards, compounds those rewards into more AERO, locks the AERO as VEAERO, distributes the new VEAERO to recent lockers. That's it. Together, these two wallets reflect a key design principle of the MetaDEX. Discretion is allowed only when it is structurally constrained and explicitly serves the whole system. Contributors derive no private benefit from these wallets. Their sole mandate by design is to bootstrap long-term value, whether by supporting key assets or growing the aligned user base. They are tools of coordination and growth, not entitlements or treasury assets, not benefiting any single stakeholder. And then there's another diagram, and it says an image, and then underneath it, it says the Flight School and public goods wallets serve the public good by channeling resources in ways no individual could. Buybacks. Between the contributor wallet, the public goods wallet, the flight school wallet, and public and protocol relays, as much as 30% of protocol revenue is programmatically routed back into the token through buybacks. They do so because more tokens make these wallets more effective at what they do. This feedback loop is fundamentally unique, not just to decentralized organizations, however, also to token models like the MetaDEX. In traditional markets, buybacks serve two main functions. They retire shares, increasing the proportional ownership of remaining shareholders. They put a floor on prices and send a signal to markets of undervaluation or excess cash holdings. These effects are only meaningful, however, when the repurchase asset carries a real claim on future value. How you doing? Buybacks in most crypto systems are mechanically similar, however, economically empty. If a token doesn't confer rights, shrinking supply doesn't enlarge anyone's economic stake. It merely changes the denominator of a speculative price. Buybacks of such tokens are just optics, or worse, exit liquidity. They create the appearance of value distribution. However, little of value is actually being distributed, and revenue spent absorbing tokens that do nothing could have funded research and development, user incentives, or other measures that could have created more revenue rather than meeting an arbitrary expectation of scarcity. The MetaDEX's buyback model diverges sharply from both of these models. In this system, tokens being bought back offer control over emissions and claims on the protocol's total production. So when a contributor or public goods wallet accumulates the MetaDEX token, it is not merely sending a market signal or finding limited growth opportunity. Here, accumulating the token can in fact increase growth by concentrating influence in system-aligned actors, enhancing emissions, efficiency, and reinforcing long-term participation. That is, there is a reason outside of speculation or even increasing revenue claim to acquire and lock the token. This is qualitatively different from what one sees even with equity buybacks. And there is an image, and underneath it says, Aerodrome has programmatically locked over 100 million Aero tokens. This mechanism also has important implications for sustainability. As discussed in Part 4, revenue distributing protocols with tokens must eventually meet the condition that revenue growth exceeds token dilution. This is challenging for most protocols. Emissions tend to be front-loaded and often on an immutable schedule, whereas revenue growth is, of course, uncertain and at times cyclical. In such systems, dilution is often a fixed cost, while growth remains speculative. By routing a portion of revenue into buybacks that lock tokens into governance, the MetaDEX introduces a structural counterweight. Circulating supply is reduced even as new tokens are issued. This reduces effective dilution, the net expansion of supply hitting the market relative to nominal emissions. And then there's another diagram of locks versus emissions in the last 3 epochs. And the epoch lasts for 1 week. Aerodrome has recently been taking tokens off the market due to the strength of buybacks, it says underneath the image or diagram. Practically, this allows the protocol to continue incentivizing growth while preserving the long-term economic position of active participants. The growth over dilution constraint still applies. However, the slope of dilution is flattened. Growth is not only more achievable, it is mechanically reinforced by the same mechanism that tempers supply. In this model, buybacks do not signal performance, they help produce it. Contributors accumulate voting weight to expand operation. The public goods wallet gains influence to support underrepresented assets. The flight school wallet reinvests to onboard new lockers. Other actors, whether individuals, institutions, or partner protocols, are free to do the same. This dynamic sheds light on a largely underexplored dimension of buybacks in systems where tokens carry real functional power and value flows through participation. Buybacks can operate not just as a mechanism for allocation, but as a different accelerant of system growth. They are neither merely cosmetic nor passively redistributive. In structurally aligned systems, they become productive. A new decentralized model for decentralized contribution. One of the most powerful consequences of contributors having no privileged economic position is that they can be supplemented by any party dedicated to advancing the MetaDEX. Governance is open. Any token holder can acquire exposure, participate in decision-making, and contribute value using the same tools and incentives available to the original team. No special permissions required. This is already happening. For example, Coinbase acquired Aero, AERO, the token, on the open market, locked it, and became a co-equal participant in MetaDEX government, just like the original contributors. Coinbase has invested in infrastructure to improve the platform's reach, helped onboard new users and assets, directed admissions to high potential or strategic pools, accrued governance weight, and revenue share in return. None of this required private negotiation. Their involvement was entirely permissionless, made possible by the system's open architecture. Because contributors are not granted exclusive control or revenue streams, there's clear value for everybody in creating on-ramps for new builders. Programs like VE token grants or targeted developer initiatives can bring in contributors across infrastructure, integrations, or liquidity provisioning. The result is a modular, composable contributor base with built-in economic alignment. The MetaDEX's engineering architecture is built to support a high level of modularity. Its design allows external developers to extend core functionality without needing approval or coordination with a central team. While other models, such as Uniswap v4's hooks, offer a form of extensibility, they often lead to fragmented economic layers. The MetaDEX offers integration into a unified, coherent economy, which is essential for protocols that depend on scale and network effects. This leads to a broader thesis. The MetaDEX represents a new organizational form for decentralized systems. New teams funded through VE Aero grants receive governance exposure on the same terms as everyone else. Their incentives are tied to long-term value creation, and their compensation is structured for liquidity and alignment from day one, toward a unified stakeholder model. Taken together, the MetaDEX's approach to funding contributors, internalizing costs, and distributing value presents not just a sound incentive model, however, a genuinely new organizational form. Instead of managing tensions between users, contributors, and investors, it structurally integrates them into one stakeholder class. Participation replaces employment. Revenue replaces treasury management. Governance remains open, but with clearly defined rules. In a decentralized setting, once this kind of model becomes possible, it becomes a strategic imperative. If the goal is to maximize user value, the contributors must be users themselves. Control of organizations should be earned through participation and commitment. This is the most durable form of alignment any system can hope to achieve, which gives it the best shot at outperformance. The end. Thank you for listening.